How about I call this meeting to order now that it's being recorded at 7:01. We're fortunate to have Duke Deneen and Dr. Adley here to discuss certain areas or topics that were discussed at the last Board of Ed meeting. That was very interesting, and I thought might be worthwhile for everyone to have a little more clarity on. Some of them might have direct budget impact this year, others might have going down the road. But with the exception of the ASSA grant, nothing hasn't been already at various times discussed at the Board of Ed. So with that, hi, Duke and Dr. Adley. Let's get going, and why don't we start with there was some discussion of potential building committees to address portables, new libraries, etc. I'm wondering if you might be able to give us a brief overview of where you are, what's going on with that, what the timing is, and your insights from what the board discussed. So I'll hand it off to you guys.
Great. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, everyone on RTM F&B and all guests. Good to see everyone via Zoom as we're into spring, and hopefully at some point in time we'll see each other in person again, but this works. So thank you for some time this evening, Jack. Always appreciate it, and thank you for the partnership in working with RTM F&B and Clara, RTM Education also. So just a quick update. We're excited. The facilities team and the board has done a nice job moving forward as part of really going back to the Ox Ridge project. Once we got that project started, the continuation, or what we were calling the ripple effect of getting the portables out of town, and also looking at the Library Reimagined project, and then also looking at some other class resizing and educational specific space needs that we needed. So a lot of work was done by the facilities committee, Mike Lynch and his team, and the Northeast Collaborative. Where we are in the process is the board has gone over via the facilities committee, and we have a concept for renovations of Henley, Holmes, and Royal, which includes the removing of the portables, the Library Reimagined, and some educational space renovations that are needed in those schools. What we asked Dr. Adley and the team to do is to go back and look at kind of a prioritization of those projects. And the administration's recommendation is to move all of those projects forward through the process. And if possible, which would really come down to the building committee being pulled together, look at potentially doing those projects at the same time. So the discussion last week was around those projects, a potential timeline as Dr. Adley put together, just to give people a view. That timeline becomes more formalized once a building committee is formed by the first selectman's office. The next step in the process is the administration finishing up the building specs. Board will then review and look at the building specs and vote on the building specs. We're estimating to see those and probably approve those. We'll look at them in April. Hopefully we'll approve them in early May. Once that's approved, we'll draw a charge up to go to the first selectman's office requesting a building committee for the next steps in terms of moving this project forward. So I'll pause there. That's kind of a high-level overview.
I just want to put out to everyone, one of the things that we want to put down on the tickler list is once that building committee is formed, it has to be approved by the RTM. So I think if we're all keeping that in the back of our mind, we can move it through as soon as the first selectmen decide to form that committee. A couple of quick questions on that. On these type of projects, first of all, I'm happy that portables are being removed. I have kids who are now in their 30s who were in those portables. So for a lot of reasons, I think we're all in town supportive of that initiative. Do we anticipate that some of the work that's going to be done will be available for state reimbursement? Or is this somewhat different than Ox Ridge?
No, not at all. It's a great question, Jack. Going through the process and part of the preliminary timeline that Dr. Adley just showed us, we would go through the state grant process similar to what we did with Ox Ridge.
So in that regard, similar to how the state does things a little tail backwards, so to say, then we would also be approving some type of bonding so that the funding is there, so that the state can do what they have to do. Is that a reasonable statement? I mean, you have best knowledge, Duke. You've been working on this.
Yes, I think it's a little different and from a renovation standpoint, but we would similarly be looking at a June of 2022 submittal of the overall project for grant reimbursement.
Okay.
So Jack, with Mr. Chairman, with renovation of this nature, it just depends literally what mood you find the State Department in on any given day, but they basically do it by square footage and the number of children and students in the building. So it remains to be determined how much this project, if any of it, certainly the roof would be. It remains to be determined how much we'll get it a state reimbursement until we go through the actual process with State Department.
Okay, but it's good to know because Clara's here and it will be going through both the RTM education and F&B committees. So if you need a June date, we can think a little bit ahead knowing that that's going to be out there.
The thing, Jack, just to mention, as part of the process, as we get the ed spec in front of the board, Jack, we'll also be scheduling a public hearing to present the project to the public.
I'm just hopeful, and pardon me for saying this with no dispersion on anyone else, but you and Kip have amassed a really superior building committee, and I would hope that we have enough other folks in town to, or at least some crossover that would enable this to have the same great committee membership that you've been able to put together on Ox Ridge. So just a little compliment to you and Kip.
We'll see.
Yes. Are there any other questions on this topic from anyone in the meeting?
I have a question on the capital items, but I don't know if that's right now, Jack.
That's next on the agenda.
Okay.
I just saw your note, Stacy. Thank you very much. This is why you're the great wizard. The next we had is that there was some discussion of the deferral of your priority one capital items with the exception of roofs. I'm wondering, did that request come from the Board of Finance, or was that something that you guys did in conjunction with looking at the building committees?
No, what we've done is, and here's where Mike Lynch and his team and Dr. Adley and the team have done a good job, is looked at these renovation projects. We've long gone back and looked at the priority one items. And just to give a quick example, if you look at Hinley, where there is paving and cement work and sidewalk that needs to be done on the bus loop at the old facade of the school where the library is, which would be taken down. What we're trying to determine, and being in the middle of the budget process, it's a little bit of a gray area and challenging in that we don't have an approved project or a building committee, but we want to look at it and take into consideration working with you, the RTM Education and Board of Finance on, what potentially may move in those capital items that could be included in the overall renovation. So in that example, Hinley parking and sidewalking, it doesn't make sense to do that and then in a year and a half or 2 years have that all in a construction site. So that's what we're working through right now. Mike Lynch at the meeting last week went through the capital items that could potentially be moved into these renovations, and he's comfortable that it would not do anything in terms of what we need to do to those schools to keep them safe, keep them running, keep them heated. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now as we go through the process.
I think the board member, Mr. Chairman, had the same questions when the administration presented it as to could there be things that would be rolled into the project.
Yeah, I think part of it is, I heard some of that, but there's also, a greater audience here now, which I thought is worthwhile to go through that again. A couple of things, because I know things like we've been talking about with the HVAC in some of the schools, how does that fall out, or is that, one of the future discussions? Because this could be a 3 to 4 year project before we get those things in. And, we just don't want something that's really essential falling by the wayside.
Yeah, well, the home project, the HVAC was for 300,000, and at one point that was a few years planned out, and then it was brought back closer to sort of even some of the capital spend tonight. But that would be something that potentially could be included in the project if that's the case. And Mr. Lynch is right here, so he knows more about the roofs than I do, and he can certainly fill you with that. Michael, can you hear me?
Yep, I'm here. We originally had the HVAC projects broken out over a few years, going out to the 22-23 year, which would have meant a build in the 23-24 fiscal year. And that falls in line with the proposed scheduling of the building renovations and expansions and removing the portables. So it fits in very well, and in a lot of ways it goes back to mirroring what our original plan was a few years ago, back in the 18-19 budget cycle. And so we're very comfortable with it.
Would you still be doing the roofs in that, knowing that when you get the roof, it typically, before you get all the bids in and everything else like that, we might approve it for, let's say, year 20, fiscal year 22. I'm assuming that the Board of Finance would be bonding that. But usually work takes at least another year or so before you really can do it, because you want to do it during the summer. And there's just not enough time from the initial appropriation that's effective July 1st to be able to do it in 2022, at the beginning of 2022. Would you be keeping the roofs in the budgets from your?
We're keeping the roofs in the capital budget.
Okay.
They're fairly standalone. We've removed doing the roofing on the libraries at Hindley and Royal, and at the first grade wing at Royal, and we've left the other roofs in. They'll be separated by the existing masonry parapets, so it's not like they'll be damaged at all by any construction.
Bert, I know you're on, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you want to ask any questions, as you were one of the actual participants in the tour this year?
Well,
Is there anything you want to specifically ask?
I want to thank the Board of Education for organizing this. It's always a high point of every fiscal year and budget discussions, because you really have a hands-on way to see what's happening. I got away with the feeling that maybe when we're fixing up schools, we're doing that for the 3 schools that need most of the work. However, those 3 schools, I just thought, might have to be taken down because they're so different from what we're seeing at Tokenic School and what we're expecting to see at Oxbridge, so that are we investing a lot of money and now in fixing up things when we know down the road we may have to really build new schools. That was my feeling when I went on that tour.
So I didn't say we were going to give you any loaded questions, Duke and Dr. Adley. So I guess that's one, but I'll let you guys handle it.
So I appreciate the question, and thank you for coming along. I learned where the some of our Eagle Scouts projects were located along the way, so thank you for that. And again, thank you for attending on this Saturday. So each of these 3 schools that we are renovating are structurally very, very sound. Each has their own character. In fact, each of the schools currently in town have their own character and culture. And what we did was we looked at what was absolutely necessary, and I think you only get a wee sense of that when you're actually in the building, because the library, media centers, and some of the classroom spaces clearly need to be replaced, and without saying the portables. We're confident, I'm confident that with the recommendations that we've put forward here, particularly since we included right sizing some of the classrooms, because something that does have to be very equitable. The look of the building doesn't have to look the same. The character, the different characters of the building are actually beautiful in of themselves, but the instructional spaces need to be equitable, where our teachers do the instructional practices that we want them to be able to do, and the spaces for the children to learn in a contemporary environment. So while the buildings look different, we've had a number of discussions with architects through the board about this issue as, are we just throwing good money at this? Are we going to need to rebuild them again? The answer to that is no, given how we have scheduled these and how we have planned for them in terms of enrollment. I'm confident that inside the book, look, they are going to be different now when you go to different buildings. But I'm confident that this will serve all those communities equitably and very well indeed. So, but it's obviously if that was a loaded question, it's a good, appropriate loaded question.
Yeah, I think thanks for facilities. The facilities committee, went through that process of looking at what point is there a new build like we did with Oxbridge. If you go back to the KG&D and even Northeast Collaborative, it's interesting. The oldest school, Holmes, continues to get high marks for what a solid, well-built, beautiful building it is. And the conclusion was, with these renovations and additional classrooms at these schools, it takes us out the next 20+ years with, ongoing normal maintenance to these buildings. But overall, again, we got a thumbs up on the overall maintenance of our buildings and the structural soundness of them.
I wanted to add one other thing before I ask if there's any other questions. I know you'll be working with the Board of Finance on the potential deferral of certain capital items, but if there's things that you're up in the air on, as the Board of Finance does vote like the second week in April, if there's something that comes up in between the Board of Finance vote and the time that we go to budget, there's always the opportunity to come to RTM Education or F&B and we can make whatever adjustments you want on the floor of the RTM that night. And it won't really be a cut because we'll have you guys explain that you approved it. So I just want to have that you have that in your back pocket, as you know, you're saying that things might not be fully vetted until May, but we're in early May, and that 1 month difference provides some flexibility to both the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, and Board of Education. Are there any other questions on capital? Stacy, I can see your hand.
Well, you stole my thunder on the HVAC and the roofs, and Bert on the buildings, but I only had one question left that I believe I know the answer to, but I'm not sure if the rest of our committee knows the answer to, so I want to ask for clarification. In Royal Elementary School, the classrooms themselves, physical sizes are small in comparison. And so would the plan for the facilities plan that you guys are looking at, would that address that?
It does, Stacey. Yes, it does.
Yeah, I think about 2 years ago, before COVID, I think in the school tour, Mike Lynch actually brought us into Royal and talked about the size and brought us into another classroom so you could actually see the differential. And I thought did an excellent job in both visually and verbally explaining that our classrooms are not necessarily, I don't want to say compliant, that's not the right word, but not necessarily the recommended size per student. Is that a better way to say it, Duke?
Pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. And Stacy, if you didn't hear, yeah, that was part of kind of the expanded look at these schools, was the educational space and what we needed to do with those schools. And, you know, it was all tied to what's being freed up when we move ELP out of these schools and consolidate that into Ox Ridge. So it's a continuation of that whole project.
So is it safe to say that all classroom sizes will be the same across all the elementary schools?
Upon completion.
Yes, sorry, yes.
They'll all meet the same educational specifications. These three schools will all meet the same educational specifications for classroom size.
Clara, again, I don't want to put you on the
Jack,
spot.
Beth has her hand up.
Beth, okay.
Just before we move on from Royal classroom size, because I was also on that tour a couple of years ago when we saw the classrooms, and you were talking last week at the Board of Ed meeting, I was thinking about that as well and wondering, is it manageable to do the construction to expand the classrooms in this time frame without disrupting the educational opportunities of the children at Royal too much? It just seemed like a big problem.
Yeah, so a lot of that will play out once a building committee is formed, and once they get into actually the specs and the work that has to be done. I think the administration and Mr. Lynch have done an incredible job of looking at what can be done over the summer. A lot of those are resizing classrooms and moving walls, so it would be summer work. Right now, as the plan stands, it looked like those schools could be in session and we could deliver education. But again, that will play out as the professionals come in terms of the architects and the overall project. But that's something we'll watch. If you go back to Ox Ridge, we went from a one-phase project, looked at a three-phase project, and landed on a two-phase project. So that'll play out once the building committee gets organized. But it's a good question. Thank you, Beth.
We have to work a little bit in conjunction with Ox Ridge timing. So some of the classes, like DLP classes, will go over to Ox Ridge, and then as the classes are moving around, we'll use the DLP classes. So there'll be a wee bit of disruption, but as I've learned the last 2 years here, our children are very adaptable and go with the flow very quickly.
Yeah, I've always said it's the parents that aren't adaptable. The kids are great. That's included me when I was a school parent. I have another question, and I don't know if Clara wants to make sure that I'm saying this right. Back a number of years ago, the downstairs of 35 Leroy had some issues. I don't know if it was mold or other things and that. And I know with the moving the copy center down there, have all those been resolved?
Actually, can you hear?
Wait, yeah, let Clara ask her question better.
Well, I don't know whether it's better, but just a little more information. When we went to C35 Leroy a number of years ago, when it was moving away from being a library, I believe that the advice was the basement was not usable to put people in because there were issues with mold and, I don't know, other things. And I guess when I saw the tour on TV, just a couple of weeks ago, it appeared that the ceiling had been removed in one area. So I just wondered, have those possible issues been resolved? I mean, was there a problem in the ceiling? Maybe you took the ceiling out. I just wanted to be sure about that because folks seemed to be adamant at the time several years ago that the basement was not usable for anything but storage.
Clara, I'll say yes, and I'll let Michael talk to the details of why that is the case.
Well, the building had two exterior entrances. It had drains right before you entered the basement, and those drain lines were redone after we moved into the building to prevent any flooding. There were two windows that leaked in water. Those have been repaired. There hasn't been a leak in that basement in probably since 2014, early 2014. I guess we moved in August or April of 2013, and by 2014 we corrected the drainage underneath, and there's a sump pump system in the basement that was put in by the town as part of the reconstruction, and that took away about 95% of the moisture. And then we did some repairs around the windows, and we removed maybe 10 square feet of sheetrock. The ceilings were removed just because the demolition of the building, the interior demolition, called for certain removals so that the sprinkler system could be put in and the fire alarm system could be put in. That had nothing to do with mold, those ceilings being removed.
Okay, so you resolved the problem. There was a problem and you have resolved it by taking care of the water leakage.
Yes, ma'am.
Moving walls. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jack.
You're welcome, Sarah. Are there any other questions on capital before I make my last remark and we can go to the next thing?
I do not see anybody's hands raised and nothing in the chat.
Okay, so I am going to make my thing with a little bit of humor, but I have expressed to several people that I would love to see time fly. And if you're going to be doing a deferral, those 3 clocks could fly out of this year into next. So with that, why don't we go? I will say that Paul Hendrickson was kind enough to send to us, and we distributed to the team some definition of the ASSA grants between 1, 2, and 3. So it's our understanding, we don't need to be exact about this, but this was also discussed. It appears that the Board of Ed will be getting approximately $900,000, at least on first cut or first blush, on an ASSA grant that will be capable of being used over 3 years. There may be some limitations on that. I'm assuming that the accounting for this will have, once that grant is received, being put in a separate reserve account because it is solely for use by the Board of Ed. And hence, if they're going to spend on it, then they would go back to the Board of Finance, or they may be able to just write on it. That's something that is between the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance. But can you explain a little bit about what the asset grant can and can't be used for? I know there was a concern at one time that it couldn't be used for items that were previously budgeted, but it appears that that will be allowed in the third asset grant. So I see Rich, so I'm assuming that this is going to be his answer.
I'm assuming that's
Well,
fine now?
even better than you can answer.
Sure. So it is the American Rescue Plan. As of
Yep.
right now, it's $964,000. It's not likely to be available probably until the summer of this year, and we have until September 30th of 2023 to obligate the funds. So while the grant's not open, some of the things that can be used for the grant that they've indicated is resources to allow schools to reopen in person, hiring and retaining school personnel that might otherwise be let go, purchasing of technology to support online schools, training and professional development, purchases of supplies to clean schools, PPEs, and then addressing learning loss. One of the things with learning loss, though, is if we do use the grant for learning loss and it happens to be a special education student who's excess cost eligible, we could not claim excess cost reimbursement for those students. So we would have to be careful in terms of what we allocate those funds for. It is a grant, so it would be in a carryover grant, similar to the IDA grant or some of the title grants we have. So it would sit in the grant accounts, and then whatever's not expended would roll over, similar to the IDA grant. But then it would have to be used by September of 2023.
Rich, can I ask a question? Because, I am cognizant of the excess cost reimbursement. And I'm just wondering how the state might apply it. I'm going to give you an example, and it may have no relevance, but I'm sure that until regs are done, there may not be an answer. But let's say we're using it in a special ed for speech and language for a student that is not going to qualify for ECR reimbursement. Is there anything that might say that if we're using it for one student that we have to apply it for other students that might be eligible for ECR?
So for ECR, we submit based on the student ID, so the individual student. So if it's a student that doesn't hit that excess cost threshold, it wouldn't be an issue. There could be students currently who don't hit that threshold, who if they get compensatory services might actually end up hitting that threshold. So it would really depend on the amount of expenses close to that 4.5 threshold. But since we submit based on the individual, that wouldn't be an issue.
Right, so that it doesn't matter if student A, we apply some of the compensatory services because they're not going to qualify, but for student B that is, we do not allocate funds to student B. That you don't anticipate being a problem.
Yep, that's correct. So it works similar to the IDA grant. If a student has a para who's in the IDA grant, we can't claim that expenditures on excess cost. But if that student has a one-to-one para, for example, that's not in the IDA grant, we can.
Based upon, since I know that, not that the money's burning a hole in the pocket, but is there any thought of how you might be applying that in the next year or so? I mean, what are the areas that you're looking at from a financial perspective as well as administration?
So I think in talking to Dr. Adley, we're kind of looking at almost like an option A and an option B. If option A is that we're in school next year in a similar mode that we're in this year, and we have to socially distance students, it might be that that grant's going to support additional teachers that might be needed. If it's an option B where we're going back to school in a mode where it's basically pre-COVID and none of those stipulations apply, we probably use it in a different manner. It might be more technology weighted, more curriculum weighted, but it really depends on how the school year shakes out next year.
Are there any other questions from anybody who's on this call on the grant? This is a good time to ask while you have Rich right here in front of us.
You stole my
Stacy,
thunder.
was it?
You stole my thunder again. I don't see anything in the chat, and I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, let's move on to some budget questions. One comes from Jan Raymond. that she sent to me, and when she said it, I actually thought it was a brilliant question. I did pass this on to Duke and Dr. Adley, but there's a lot of discussion about social emotional needs of our students. But does the district have plans to address the social emotional needs of our returning teachers, as they also have experienced a lot of things during this 1 year, this interesting year and a half? If so, can you provide some of your thoughts on that? I'm not asking for programs or anything else, but just your thoughts on something on that topic.
Sure. Certainly having schools socially and emotionally healthy and well for our staff in terms transfers to our children. So we started this year actually for professional development with Dr. Tina Bogren, and Dr. Tina Bogren came and did professional development. Right like the first section we had was a happy, healthy educator as a real focus, and that was very well received by our staff as to kick off the year. Probably more so that it was actually acknowledged that we need this, and we need it right at the end of the year. So that has been in place ever since. The whole way through the year, our staff also have access to the clinicians that we have in the school, whether they be counselors, psychologists, social workers, or otherwise, or administrators. So we have that in place. We also have services through margin human resources that our staff can take advantage of, and that's employee assistance programs and so on and the like. But the social emotional planning for our staff is on a daily basis, and creating that culture where they feel safe and well as well. I will remind you though, when you come back for next year, our students, our staff are actually in now, right? So they're actually sort of in most of the year. So it's not as if they have been out and coming back again. But yes, just as we did last year, we'll continue to do that. There is a focus next year on the Yale Rower program for a social emotional learning for our children, but that also requires our staff participating in professional development around social and emotional learning. So there's a sort of 360 look at this, both for staff and for students. So it will be a priority for both next year.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. I anticipated that. Go ahead.
Jan has her hand raised.
All yours, Jan.
I just wanted to say how impressed I am with the answer you gave to the question I had. It just sounds like you guys are doing a wonderful job for teachers, and the openness with which these issues are being dealt with is critical in my mind. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
This is a question that Paul and I had discussed, and I want to make sure that what I'm saying is correct, so it's a little bit of a confirmation. My understanding is that we are on the Anthem Healthcare budgeted expense. There was a cap, which is good for us because our experience rate wasn't the nicest for the last 2 years, which would have had more significant increases. So first, I'm looking for confirmation that that statement is accurate. And second, has there been any change to the Anthem Healthcare budgeted expense at this time?
Yes, no. I'll let Rich do the color analysis.
So that is correct. We do have a rate cap at 7.95%. That was part of the agreement of moving all the staff members over last year. That in the second year, no matter what our claim experience would be, the increase wouldn't exceed 7.95%. In terms of whether we have any updated numbers from Anthem, we do not yet. We're expecting the rates to be finalized by mid-April.
Okay, so that's something else. If it's a significant number, you can always come to us. And if an appropriate adjustment is determined to be needed by the Board of Finance and that, we can always do things on the RTM floor. Second part about that, and this one is handled in a couple ways. I know that the March 1st number for ECR was approximately 90 point like some percent of reimbursement. I was wondering when the final number will have in April, because I know they're going through things and that's what they're anticipating, but with what the submissions were in March, that number might change. So I'm interested in what your perspective is on that, and the timing of when you will know what the final number is.
So we did forecast the reimbursement rate of 75%. The state had estimated revenues of 83.4% when they released it in February. They did expect that to go down based on districts doing their March 1st filing compared to their December 1st filing. We likely won't get a result until end of April, beginning of May, but preliminarily we did reach out to the state and they think it'll probably be in the high 70s to about 80% for this current school year. So if we look at next school year, one of the reasons it's actually higher than in the past is because schools haven't been in session as much. Schools have been remote or they've been hybrid. So a lot of those costs just haven't materialized for a lot of districts. So the expectation is if schools are going to be in session and schools throughout the state of Connecticut are going to see a lot of compensatory services, the excess cost reimbursement for next year will likely be a lot lower. The budget at the state stays pretty much flat every year. So the more expenditures that get submitted statewide, the lower your reimbursement is going to be, and the less expenditures that get submitted statewide, the higher your reimbursement will be.
Right, I think the number is someplace about 144 million that they've been giving forever, or something along those lines. Interesting enough, it used to rise when there was a gubernatorial election, but not having one next year, I think we're not going to be so fortunate. On that actually affects what the Board of Ed may end up with its excess funding at the end of the year. And since I look at the numbers that you provide, it was about 670. Now it looks like it's in the 800s and that. Can you comment on that?
Sure. So the February forecast was a positive $870,000. So when we first asked for the appropriation, we were around 600,000 to the positive if you stripped out COVID. The two biggest changes were we changed the excess cost reimbursement from 67.5 to 75. We did get some savings in athletics for a shortened winter season, so transportation and officials primarily, and then some savings in out-of-district transportation. If the out-of-district facilities closed, we're not paying for transportation. If excess cost does come in at about 80% on that high end that they had discussed, we'd probably get about another $169,000. So another $169,000 on an $870,000 forecast would be a little over $1 million.
Okay, and that's important because when we're looking at if that all comes back, pardon me, if that all comes back, then that affects what the general fund has. And when the Board of Finance is looking as to whether or not they can use the general fund, those dollars are appropriate. I have a couple more questions. One is just with humor, again, is there any way in the Board of Ed packet that when you show the financials that they're landscaped so I don't keep on having to turn my computer sideways so I can read it? Because my iPad keeps on correcting it, so I can't use the iPad. So that's just something if we can figure out, even if it's packet 2, would be greatly appreciated. I know in the Finance Committee, I believe that they are landscaped when you send them out. The CDC recently discussed going from, I believe, a 6-foot distancing to a 3-foot distancing. What are the thoughts on the school on handling that? And, is it something that's been given down to this, from the State Board of Education to our school districts?
So,
Is somebody answering that?
so Mr. Chairman, it's, we have been working with 3 feet. Students are in, we can't bring them by 6 feet, so we are already at 3 feet. The CDC said 3 feet doesn't mean that students within a 3 feet sort of radius are quarantined. They are still quarantining, required to quarantine at 6 feet radius. So even though they say sit 3 feet, we'll be quarantined still at a 6 feet radius. If that makes sense.
That does, and I appreciate the answer to that, and have that discussed. Another thing that I wanted to confirm from one of the members of the committee
Can you hear me?
was that I believe that there, during the discussion of moving the positions of the current SESS facilitators to be assistant principals, that all individuals would have to reapply for those jobs, and it wasn't.
Can you hear me now?
Stacy, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Duke, you guys are choppy. Duke, can you try to talk? Let me see if I can help you. I think it's on your end.
If somebody can just nod, I think what I heard was, even though the CDC had talked about a 3-foot distancing.
Jack, Duke and Dr. Adley are gonna sign off and then sign back in. They're gonna.
Sounds good. Okay. So we'll just wait a while, but Marge is here, so she can answer this question, and Shirley's here. I just want to confirm, one of our members asked about the hiring of the new SESS assistant principals. And correct me if I'm wrong, Marge or Shirley, I thought I heard during the discussion of the budget that this isn't a guaranteed move up, that everybody who wants one of those positions is going to need to interview for them, like other candidates that might be posted. Is that a correct statement? And modify anything that I said that was possibly incorrect.
I think we both can answer that. I'll just start and then March can give you some of the numbers. Yes, it is an open and posted position. We've had many responses, and there is no automatic nexus between being a current facilitator and the AP position. It is an open candidacy, and we have many qualified candidates, both in-house and outside. Marge, do you want to say some of the numbers?
Right. All I can add is that we had about 140 people apply. So we paper screened people, in the principals and I, and they're doing the screening interviews in each building, because each building obviously is getting one. And so each building is screening between 6 and 7 candidates, and then we'll move them forward. So it is a full and open process, and the SES facilitators are involved in those interviews.
I have to comment that it is very impressive to the district, Shirley and Marge, that we would have such a phenomenal response. And I'm sure even if you're looking at 30 candidates, there's another 30 that were all, good candidates to look at. So that's very impressive and speaks very highly of the district and the concept.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Oh, Powerful Wizard, are they back on yet?
They are here.
We think.
All right. So why don't we
Can
re-go
you hear us?
through the, yes. Why don't we re-go through the 3-foot distance so that everybody can hear the answer without the static.
Duke and Dr. Adley, did you hear the question?
Mr. Chairman, okay?
Duke, it's still a bad connection.
I think the question was the 3 feet, assuming that you can hear me, I'll respond in kind. So the CDC reduced its space to 3 feet, but we have been at 3 feet anytime remote.
We had you for a second and now you're choppy again.
Stacy, I know I don't have great technology, but I did
Oh,
know to call in. So if they want to phone in, that might give you a different option for clarity.
Thank you, Shirley. I will, Duke, want me to send you that phone number to call in? All right, I'll send it.
It's just because I've been able to learn
Oh,
from people like yourself, Stacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley.
I'm opening it up while we're waiting for Duke and Dr. Adley to dial in. Are there any other budgetary questions that might be out there at this time for any of the members of the Board of Ed? Well, while we're waiting, we can ask how many people lost limbs during the windstorm last night as it went from spring to back to winter. I ended up with some more firewood.
We did okay at our house.
Anything? Yeah. The problem is we already have about 12 cords of wood. So.
Bob Lyon says he's okay at his house. I gave Duke a number, give him a chance to call in.
We're more than willing to. I don't know, this is unusual hearing F&B with silence.
I can see Duke dialing. Let's see. Let me get in. Oh, here we go. Caller 1 has arrived. They're here.
Great.
I'll put it on mute so there's no background noise.
Welcome back, gentlemen.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So the 3 feet. I'm sorry, I'm just getting a lot of relay back.
3 foot is in place, period.
Yeah. Just to move on, Jack, the 3 feet is in place. 6 feet we have in place for lunch.
Jack, you're muted now.
I want to thank everyone. First of all, thank you for answering that and taking the time. I want to thank all the Duke and Dr. Adley and the support staff for the Board of Ed, the Board of Ed members, and other members of the RTM Education Committee that were here. I really appreciated this discussion and the time you've spent with us. And you know, unless you want to listen to the rest of our meeting, you guys are all free to go. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank you for your
you.
time.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Board of Selectmen budget. Lisa, are you here? Can you unmute yourself, Lisa Yarnell?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. You met with the Board of Finance members and Mac with the Police Department. Can you give us a brief update of what transpired?
Yes, actually, I think it's probably one of the best meetings I've been to because we had the Board of Finance, we had the Police Commission there because Brett was there and Kevin Kaufman,
Cunningham.
Kevin's last name, Cunningham. And we had Mac and myself. So we had 4 perspectives on it. We went over the budget in terms of Rob negotiated and drove the computer to put up the screens on the wall for the budget. People asked questions if they had questions on the budget. We then separately talked about the riot gear because I asked the questions that you had sent to me about the riot gear. So I can start there. Basically, the feeling was from Chief Anderson that they do not have really adequate protection now if they had to go in now as a backup to somebody in the area to be on the front line. And so getting the gear was, in his estimation, better than what we have now. The training is not in place mandatorily to go along with the gear. The training will come, as Captain Anderson said, when the state allocates it. There's Kevin. Hi, Kevin. The riot gear will be available before the training is available. Hopefully I asked the question, could we do anything to help, meaning as the board, as F&B, as the town, to help them get more resources for the training. And I think the answer was, it will be when it will be, I think is what Captain Anderson said. So that's not going to happen exactly the way you would perceive it to happen, Jack. But the riot gear is necessary and will help make them more protected than they are today. So my only, concern is that the training come at some point in time and that, we get it reported to us and we follow up on it if it doesn't. And that's really the best I can answer. They didn't seem to feel there was any control over it. We all talked about, in fact, Rob brought up the point that I had mentioned to Stacy, that the 2020 midnight shift
had gone up so significantly to something north of 25% of the calls. Chief Anderson said that he felt that that was a lot of the unlocked car gangs that were roaming around, gotten worse now due to economics and COVID, and that that would not change if there were 5 people sitting there on the switchboard at night. That is what it is, and that they just have to be prepared to address them and deal with them. It didn't seem that there was anything more significant than that. He said, obviously there's domestic disputes that happen, but that's not really what's causing the increase. It's really the unlocked cars. So I think we could do something as a town if there was something issued from Jamie or from the town in terms of locking cars at night. Because I think because it's a small town mentality and familiar neighbors and people have been doing it this way for the last 30 to 50 years, they haven't really experienced a city environment. But I think what we have are city gangs coming in, or at least gangs from other cities, and they feel that if the town was more diligent, there wouldn't be an issue. If they tried 100 cars and they were all locked, then they would all dissipate after some point in time. The other question on the table, obviously, was, about the civil dispatch. And, this year is, and Rob was cute because Rob indicated that this is his 9th time, I think, hearing this conversation. And he's been trying to get 9 people over 9 years, and this is the final 3, and that it really has become very effective. Chief Anderson said that he can't even imagine if they didn't have the 6, and that he would very much like to have the 3. I played devil's advocate and asked whether or not if there was a real serious situation and I was calling 911, how I would feel having a civil dispatch person there on the other side. And he said, how would you feel if you had to wait for a call, for somebody to get back to you, or more importantly, wait on a line? And I even think that I think that the answer is that surrounding towns farm it out to a third-party service where nobody knows where anybody is or where the landmarks are that the people are calling about. And the feeling is that having a town person that actually knows where Weed Beach is, or knows where Pear Tree Park is, or Point is 100 times better than a third-party facility that would be doing it. So I think they're very happy with the results, and I honestly think that they feel that it's every bit as good as having, in place an additional. I asked, do they need he said he'd had on the force probably for the last 10 or 20 years that he can remember 51 full-time employees. And I asked, well, what happens if you had 52 or 53? Would you still need the civil dispatch? And he said that it's not a job really that a full-time employee needs to be doing. That it's really a job that somebody can do that's got proficiency and can man a phone station, and there was no reason the civil dispatch couldn't work. So I think he sold me on it for the first time, and I've listened to the argument about 3 times now. And I think that I was convinced that it's something they very much believe is as useful as any other situation for them. And then I don't know if there was anything else. Kevin, was there anything I didn't cover?
No, I think you got it, Lisa. I think one of the important things to remember is that the dispatch function has become a very specialized function, and we these guys go to get special certifications, right? That the technology is far different than what it was in years past, where you could plop an officer in that chair. And it's only going to get more complex as we get artificial intelligence in there, as we get the enhanced 911, where you can text photos. You really want somebody with that knowledge, skill, and expertise, and also familiarity with the town in there to do the best possible, Lisa. I think with the other things that we also discussed too.
I don't think there are any issues on the budget, Jack.
Yeah, the reason why I asked the training, and Kevin, you can speak within the commission in that. I always look to how we can protect our police officers and having appropriate training on any of the things. Recently the Darien Foundation gave that wonderful new laser test training. I think that was about a year or so ago. That greatly enhanced what we had, especially since the vendor that we had wasn't continuing supporting it. But I didn't know if they had something in that training module that might help to explain that. But definitely if we're getting the gear to protect our officers as well, is, how to de-escalate this, that, and the other is always important, from both sides of the equation, but also to ensure that our officers are protected. So, the other thing that I did ask, and I don't know if they answered, but the Police Accountability Act, I know, had some impact. I'm curious what the impact potentially was on the budget or on the morale of the police department.
So for number 2, I would say, Jack, that it is going to have an impact because we are going to have some additional mandatory training coming up. And we're going to do some additional things like mental health testing and those things. But I think the chief built that into his budget as far as we know and can anticipate. This year is doing those mental health assessments. I think you have to have one every 2 years. So doing a subset of the department year 1, year 2, year 3. So we built that in as best we could, knowing what the requirements are, and we found a vendor. But I think to your other point, Jack, there is going to be some more training that's mandated, some of which are going to come down from the state. So it would behoove us to kind of wait, because if we do training and it's not up to the standards of the state, we'd have to do it again. So I think there's just going to be a tiny bit of lag between we get some equipment and they're trained to the newer standard. Not to say that they're not already trained, but there might have to be a tiny bit of additional training that's mandated from the state above and beyond what we do in the academy and what we do in our regular training regimen.
All right, and that makes sense. I didn't know whether or not things would be coming from the state. The other little nuance that I'm just going to mention, I don't know if you have any follow-up, but part of the Police Accountability Act was that no police force should have any military equipment. And while I understand nobody really believes that the police forces should have tanks rolling down the street, night vision goggles are also considered military equipment, and I'm wondering if the state has saw fit, because that's used throughout the state for searching for people. If we have looking for somebody in the water, that has been very helpful. But theoretically, that's considered military gear. I'm wondering if and there's a couple others that fit into that type of category for public safety and that. I'm wondering if you've heard anything about them addressing that, or at least giving a slightly better definition than just a blanket military gear, which I think most people think as of tanks.
Yeah, so. Jack, I think that's something we're looking at closely. I know that one of the things that was key in that was, kind of piling on your purchasing through Department of Defense, purchases, which we don't do. I think the one thing that we bought through the Department of Defense budget was a paper shredder, but no helicopters and machine guns or anything like that. I think though, Jack, that to your point has to be a little bit more fleshed out and a little bit more guidance, where a night vision goggle would assist us in search and rescue, those things. So I don't think we have quite clarity on exactly what the definition of military equipment is.
Yes, no, I agree, and I'm hopeful that, that over time, they do address those things, because there are some things that police forces use that are just good community equipment to have. And I didn't think Darien was out buying tanks or F-15s. So,
No, that's a great point, and I think something we're going to have to watch really closely as they start really defining what that is.
okay.
The other learning lesson, Jack, that came out of it, and Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, at least for me, was that the chief was very forthright about saying that he thought that retirement requests would start accelerating because he felt that there was just an older group of, been in the job a long time guys who weren't going to go to the new rules and standards as easily and just would ask to get out. I don't know whether that was a surprise or not, but voluntarily he said that they would be asking to. Was that?
Well, I'll also, go ahead, Kevin.
Sorry, Jack. Lisa, I think that was primarily a function of just the age and demographics of the department, right? We have a.
Okay, and not the Police Accountability Act. Okay.
Not maybe necessarily. It might be, one of the many factors, but I do believe that there is a population that is getting on 20 years, and actually, being on the police pension board, you have to, kind of account for that, and just as we have a chunk of officers with approaching the 20-year. Right, you have to account for the fact that you're going to probably have some retirements coming in a wave soon.
Which sometimes helps the budget because it takes time to replace those officers.
I didn't mean to mistake that.
And the replacements are less than you would for a 20-year lieutenant, right?
Yes, yeah. I also know that one of the things, speaking to some police officers that I know from Stanford, both existing and retired, that the personal liability part was insurance that it appears our police officers now have to personally pay for. Is that a correct statement?
Jack, I think that hasn't officially been fleshed out. I can't be certain about this, but I feel like I think that is still in the works as to what level and type of liability that you need as an individual.
Okay, that's good to know at least. Iris, I saw your hand raised. You're one of the few people that I can actually see.
Well, y'all all know I've gone on record as saying I think buying riot gear is a bad precedent for our town. But I also don't think night goggles, even though they're military, I think they have a lot more uses than riot gear. So that I don't have a problem with that. But based on an article that I read this past week in the Times, a review of all of the police procedures and the rioting that went on this past year, many of the problems that occurred, besides people going crazy, was that many policemen were sent out in riot gear without training. And so things happened because they did not have the proper training. And so I would be very hesitant that if we purchase this riot gear, that if we don't have the training, then our guys should not be sent out if they don't have the training. Anyway, I'm just throwing that out because I just think that that's, if you're going to buy this kind of gear, you really need some good training so that you don't escalate intense situations. I mean, we had a very peaceful march here in town. If our guys had shown up in riot gear because they were worried, I mean, that's such a bad look. So there has to be the training. And so if we're going to buy it and put it in a closet, fine, I guess. But like, I just am really concerned that we're getting the gear and we're not getting training. It just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Part of the reason why I asked that question, Iris, is I know what your position was, and so I wanted to take it out a little bit to see if and when we are going to have training. So,
We got an answer to if, but not when.
right.
I just would
That is
make,
correct.
you know, and for our guys, I don't want our guys hurt and going out untrained. I mean, you know, this is not what their normal process of being a Darien policeman is to be involved in any kind of, you know, mass. It's just not normal for our size of town. I wouldn't want them to get hurt. And you get hurt if you hurt other people if you're unprepared. And that's coming out in studies. It's coming out, you know, all over. And so you know.
Well, I think it's a good point for having police departments put a little pressure on the standards board for the police to get something out sooner rather than later, even if it ends up being a two-part training exercise. So it may not be the town itself that's responsible, because there's going to be certain standards of what's going on, and you want to make sure that you're teaching people the right thing the first time. I didn't know if it was in the you know, school modules that we had, which is part of the reason I'm asking. But I do think that the police chiefs in the communities can start to put pressure on the board itself that sets the training standards to come out with something like that sooner rather than later. Any other questions on the police side?
Jan has a question, and then I have one after her.
Okay, Jan, you're up.
It's not so much a question as a comment, but Lisa commented about locking the cars and the concerns about car thefts, and mentioned that maybe there should be some townwide statement. And I wanted to say, I think there's been a lot in the newspapers about locking your cars, and a lot in the police reports about locking your cars. I think everyone knows that it's an issue in town. Certainly, I live in Norotan Bay, and the association keeps sending out bulletins, and I know that other associations do as well. The other thing I wanted to say is I think it's not fair to assume that the thefts that are going on are from people that are not residents of Darien, and that Darien is a target for other towns. Some of that may be true, but I know for a fact that it's not always the case. And we've just seen in last week's paper the story about our residents breaking into a school, and I happen to know for sure that that's happening in cars. So I just want to be sure that we're not placed
Jan, that's
just
a point
outside
well
of
taken.
Darien, because I think
That-
Wayne, we have to own up to our issues.
Yes, I think that's a
Okay.
point well taken. Stacy?
I have a question, and then Mike Heights also has a question. I have a question, Kevin, on where we are with staffing the dispatchers. Last time we had an update that there was still 2 dispatchers on the daytime shift that was not staffed. So I'm just curious where we are with that.
Stacy, I believe that we are full contingent on the first 2 shifts. I think that the next the additional 3 would be for the overnight.
Does that answer your question, Stace?
Yes, and Mike is next.
Thanks, Stacy. Just to build on Jan's observation about the car thefts, the mounting car thefts, and all. I recall that a couple years ago, we increased the fine penalty for false fire alarms, and I think police alarms as well. And I'm just thinking that is there any consideration about perhaps imposing fines for instances where there's a car theft and it can be shown that keys were left in the car was unlocked, something along those lines, as a possible deterrent? That's all I have.
Like, I think that's a consideration and something we'll certainly look at. I think the chilling effect there is that you're going to get unreported and uninvestigated thefts. If gosh, you just left your keys and, you were in a rush or something happened, and we all do it despite our best intentions. And you do unfortunately have a break-in, and then you're going to get fined. You're going to find people not reporting them, and then the police not knowing them and potentially investigating them. So that's a chilling effect of what could happen if you impose. But I think the chief has a lot of good ideas around some additional things the department can be doing, some additional communication. So I think that's all going to come out very soon.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the police? Iris, go ahead.
I was going to say maybe our new public relations consultant can come up with some way to help people remember to lock their cars.
Yeah, ultimately, if cars keep on being stolen from town, it eventually is going to increase everybody's car insurance rates. That's how this thing operates in the industry, is that based upon incidences of what's going on, they can apply that in the district. So while people might think it's minor, there can be that increase just down the road. And any other questions? All right, I wanted to cover some of the things. Louisa and Iris, I think we talked about the library already, didn't we? In a prior meeting?
We did. We didn't really have many issues. I think our only concern was, or not even a concern, was just the raises and how that went,
Yeah, ultimately, I do believe, and it's been something that's talked about from the Board of Selectmen side, that for anybody who's getting a grant, they want to create a new document. I believe the operating document, if anybody could find it in any of their files for the library in the town, may date back to when even Eisenhower was president. So, there are some things that should be probably worked out on that.
The director was supposedly going to get that information, but I don't.
I think they were supposed to pass it in prior years.
She didn't have a problem with the need to provide it at all. So
no, that they provided the salary and the allocation of people's work time, and there was really only 3 or 4 in the whole library, between what work is done for the library itself and what work is done from friends. That was given to Kate and Jen. And with the new turnover, I don't know. I think that's the reason why it wasn't provided. I honestly have not had a chance to follow up with either Kate or Jen on whether or not they received it. So I'll do that tomorrow. I just want to quickly go over the Reserve Fund for Capital Non-Recurring Assets Grants and Revenue. There was a significant drop in revenue this year from what was budgeted. This is budgeted by Jen, and the actual revenue based upon the interest rates was much lower, and so next year reflects the lower amount. There are grants that we receive in the capital area, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, for road work and other things like that. Basically, when I spoke to Jen about how this is determined, it is basically what we were paid this year, we budget for next year. It's coming from the state. It seems to work fairly well. And, my philosophy on budgeting that seems to work well is there's no reason to change it for these amounts of money. The excess cost we actually, and other grants we discussed earlier, debt service, there is an OS report, and I guess maybe Jenny, you can explain what that is much better than I will, as I will definitely not use the technical terms. So if you don't mind, I'll hand that off to you.
You mean the official, so last year when the town issued some bonds, they published a prospectus called an official statement. And in the official statement is the list of disclosed the outstanding indebtedness. It's very detailed information. It's part of the disclosure requirement. And Jack, I don't know how in depth you want me to get, but it's in terms of the, it lists the bonds and, basically per maturity and what the coupons that we're paying on there. And that'll get updated. I know that the town's contemplating going forward with another bond issue. I know that there's more bonding to do on the school, on Oxford Elementary School. So they'll update that information and put that in the next official statement. But I don't know if there's anything specific you want me to add.
No, it's if anybody's
It's
interested
a great
in reading
resource
it,
for, yeah, if you want to get a quick recap of the financial picture of the town of Darien, you should look at the town's official statements from their most recent bond issue. It's a great summary.
yeah, and it's very interesting because they also give all of the ratios and other things like that of how much can be in school debt, how much can be in town debt, how much can be in sewer debt, how can be in total debt, and where the town in fact is on that, as well as the maturity of what we have. And we are paying off significant amounts over the next 3 years. So anybody who wants a copy, let me know and we'll forward it to you. It's wonderful reading if you're having difficulty going to sleep.
Jack, Paul Hendrickson is here and he just had a comment about the EMS line item.
Paul, on you. I'll give Paul the line.
Yeah, there was some increase in the amount that we pay Stanford, about 30,000. It seemed a bit out of line, both on a percentage and a total dollar basis. I was wondering if anybody has the background on that.
We don't.
Okay.
But it's a good follow-up. I do know that that is one of the areas that we'll be looking at, not we, the town, because there's the emergency services study that's in the budget for next year. That, I think that's going to be a very interesting study, and it's only like 30,000. I was kind of hopeful that we might be able to, similar to how we do the approval for appropriation for like replacing a boiler earlier, that's something that might be moved into this year so that study can be done. So.
Okay. Thanks.
Paul, we got some answers on the other things. I'll send you an email later on it tonight. And once again, I want to thank you for the ESSER document that was sent around.
I hope you can decipher it better than most people.
I was just wondering, they didn't give us a Rosetta Stone to go along with it to read it.
The ESSER 2 grant and the America Rescue Plan, both of those are still rather nebulous as how they can be used. They really can't be used to reduce taxes. In education speak, they're supposed to supplement and not supplant funds. And they have about 4 or 5 different categories. Safety, health, and remediation are basic ones. And the big fear is due to this year of COVID, many students have slipped behind in their studies. And if there's some way to help remediate that over the summer and perhaps go into the fall, these funds can be used for that. However, these funds also require extensive record keeping, both invoices and paid and evidence of payment. you have to keep them on file. One of my people, about half her job is keeping track of this for potential state and federal audit.
Yeah. Well, the money is nice to have, but the documentation will cost some money, as some of these things typically do. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to do, and I'm hopeful that some additional nuances come out to the towns once that goes. Let's see, I think we covered everything of what's going on tomorrow at the Board of Finance. Are there any other questions on, they have police, Board of Ed, debt service, excess cost, reserve fund, capital non-recurring item, grants and revenue, and the library? If not, then we can go on to the rest of our meeting.
Jack, if you want to, I have Kate's response on that EMS question. If you, it was in an email from the general government.
Please answer, yes.
If you would like me to read what she had to say.
Please do, yes.
Okay. She says the consultant is not intended to study EMS if you mean emergency medical services. The intent is to look at how we provide emergency services, primarily emergency preparedness and the fire service. She says, I prefer to discuss this more confidentially. As for the amount, it is a guesstimate. I do not believe there are any legal requirements. Yes, there are possible budget implications related to the likely advice, but I want to stress that that does not automatically mean an add to the budget. I expect that there could be recommendations which could reduce our budget and or help spend the available dollars more efficiently. So that's what it's for. More of a...
Okay, I didn't know if it included the EMS, apparently not. I'm trying to think, did anybody else recall, I know that part of the fees associated with the EMS services is the collection rate to health insurance. And if we're not collecting at the same, if post 53 and the EMTs are not having the same collection rate, I think that does increase our fees, and that may be part of what was budgeted. But we will check on that. Okay. I'm going to go on to the reserve fund for capital non-recurring reserve account, and just have a brief conversation on that. I'd like to actually have a sense of the meeting at our next meeting on this. For a number of years, I've requested that the Board of Finance develop some type of policy similar to what they did on the guidance, because it's not policy, it's guidance on the general fund balances. And in conversations that I've had over the years, the fact of the matter is by adding to this capital reserve, and I personally believe there's significant funds that should be returned to our taxpayers, especially in a year of this. My initial calculations are that it might be it should be at a $300,000 to $400,000 range. There's various ways to calculate it, but typically they haven't even spent that. And now with a review of closed projects at both September and March, those amounts end up being more than a year-end budget. If we say, okay, if the Board of Finance says, okay, the guidance is $300,000 to $400,000, and anything above that is being used to purchase other capital items, then they will know that they're going to get some reimbursement of those funds in September. One of the ways of possibly looking at it is by saying, what is the net capital that has been appropriated over the last 5 years. And if you then divide that by 5 and multiply it times 10%, since that's what we typically want the projects to not be over, it ends up being about 440,000 in the first cut. However, in my opinion, there are certain aspects of capital that really don't need to be reserved for that 10%. The vehicles accruals, we know exactly what those are going to be. The road accruals that we have in there in capital, which approximate between $900,000 to $1 million, even higher, we're not overspending on that. And therefore, a 10% reserve probably isn't necessary on those items, which if you take those out of the 5 years, including the offset revenue that we get for those from the state, the grants, it would be within the $300,000 to $400,000 range. So I want to work up some numbers, have some further discussions. I'll send out an analysis and present it, and then I'd like to present it to the Board of Finance of just our thoughts on that matter. I also just want to give a little bit of additional information. So what's in the reserve fund for capital non-recurring assets?
Bert has his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Bert.
I just want to add that whatever money we have in the general fund right now, nobody can earn much more than 0% if you keep it in the short-term money market account. So that's another consideration. The money is just sitting there.
We're going to deal with that right after this one, Bert. I did want to add some additional information to everyone. If we're bonding for a project, let's say the replacement of sidewalks, and that runs over, there are 4 different ways in which that is resolved. It can be offset by another bonding that's under. It can, and it's not only paying for it, but it's also approving the appropriation, because if the project's over, they've overrun not only the bonding, but they've also overrun the appropriation that was given by the Board of Finance and then by the RTM. So they could go to the capital reserve and do there, which would give both the appropriation approval. They could also go to the general fund and do it that way. Or they can look at other means, such as the grants that might be out there, and apply to that. So it's important to know that when we're looking at the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenses, the items that we're bonding are not in there. So this is a much lower dollar amount than what we've had. So I think at our next meeting, I'd like to present an analysis on that, and then take a sense of the meeting and go there. Which brings me to Bert's point. During the Board of Ed presentations by the RTM Education and F&B committees, Education did state to the Board of Ed that they believe that there's significant funds, even with the knowledge of the supplemental appropriation, that they thought should be used by the Board of Finance to accommodate some of the higher expenses. We're up about 7% right now. And at the most recent meeting, which absolutely gobsmacked Seth, the range was 0 to 9%, but it definitely wasn't going to end up being 0. So on the increase in the mill rate. So I want to take a sense of the meeting and have a discussion of whether or not we feel that some of the, at least we can give our opinion that some of the excess funds that are in the general fund above the 12% guidance should be used this year. So let's have a discussion on that. Bert, you had mentioned to me earlier that, you know, it's a good rainy day fund, and this year is a...
Yeah, I think that ultimately, of course, the first decision is by the Board of Finance on any of this. But perhaps for the Board of Finance to understand where we come in, to do that and to have a sense of the meeting, how do we feel about that? Okay, some people want to put money away for the rainy day forever, and other people say, well, it's raining, you know, spend some of it, because we certainly don't need a lot more than what is warranted to ensure that we keep our AAA rating, and that and whatever is commensurate with what we have always said, or the Board of Finance has always said, is the minimum amount that should be set aside. And so if the money was earning a good return, that might be different, but this money isn't really earning anything. So you might consider smoothing out the heaps and valleys that are automatic with any budget from year to year. And this year, it looks like we're looking at a big tax increase, and maybe some of it can be smoothed out. That's my point.
Yeah, I'll also add to that, that the ESSER 3 grant will cover some of the expenses that people may have thought, oh, we have to keep some money in the back pocket should the Board of Ed need it for expenses that they did not put in the budget for COVID-19. Well, you got, you know, $900,000 to cover it now. So as long as you're documenting it and taking care of the needs of the students, that might not be, as well as hiring some teachers, it appears, that might not be necessary. So I'd like to propose a sense of the meeting that we state, at least on the general fund, that we believe some of the general funds should be used this year to reduce the budget. I'm not giving a dollar amount, nor would I attempt to. So is there a second on that?
I'll second it.
Okay. So, and again, this is nothing more than a sense of meeting that we can express what our thoughts are. Again, the Board of Finance will have their own discussion on this issue.
Jack, Jenny wants to talk.
I'm sorry? I see Jenny. Go ahead.
Hi. You know, I just wanted to bring up, you know, I think there was an article in the Buchanan Advertiser yesterday, 2 days ago, about where was it? Buchanan getting like 6.3 million in stimulus money, and I don't know if I don't know what that breaks down to. Like I said, it was an article dated on the 26th. So to the extent that, you know, Darien is also going to be getting some stimulus money in addition to the 900,000 we just spoke about, that also just adds more context to what that excess fund balance is doing. I guess my question is what's the end game of letting that fund balance grow? And at what point, I gotta believe there's some sort of formula, and maybe Martha would be able to answer some of this, as she was a former Board of Finance member, of like, is there a formula as to what point the fund balances, you start using that to go pay for projects?
There is, I'm going to interrupt. There is a formula, and and it's been revised since Martha was on the board. It essentially is 12, the required reserve is 12% of the revenues of the town, which is a number that we control. So anything above that, that's why if you're looking on the Board of Finance, and they always have a reconciliation of what they're using, like the 9,200 came out of the general fund recently, which is, minuscule. There appears to be someplace in the neighborhood of $5 million. I'm going to say $5.5 million prior to any of the funds coming in from the town, or we get a little bit of revenue from the police, running the police guard things when they're looking at sewers and that, because there's an admin fee that's paid at the end of the year. In conversations with Jen, the town really isn't going to get a lot of money this year. They're not going to, in the past, they've been equal to the Board of Ed on what they've been contributing from a myriad of reasons. Some of it just good budgeting and expense control. Others are revenue items that are coming in higher. But some of the revenue offsets the revenue that didn't come in. But they've had a good share of coming in. The town will not have that this year. And we just heard from Rich that it might be about 800,000. We don't know how the Board of Ed might determine how to use that at the end of the year, if there's certain things that they want to purchase. We also don't know if there's any changes that will reduce our educational cost sharing, which we get in August. But it's probably safe to say that we have 6 million over. We'll end up with about 6 million over what the minimum amount that we need of that 12%. So that's the amount that we're asking them to consider using. And we're not suggesting that they use all of it, but, based upon their formula, that the amount that they're going to need is going to increase because our budget increased this year. That's something to be considered. Does that help answer the question?
Martha?
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I would add is I remember watching a presentation by bond counsel, and they said that, 12% kind of as a minimum, rating agencies prefer to see something in the neighborhood of about 15%.
So I would say that, but anything over probably open.
Yeah.
And that is one of the things that Connecticut is different on how we have money. One of the reasons why we keep our AAA rating is that our grand list is very high, and we have the ability to raise funds quickly. So that's part of the offset of the fact that we don't have as much money sitting in the bank as a percentage of the budget as they might desire if you were out in Texas.
And then I saw Mike unmuted himself, so I don't know if he wanted to speak.
Thank you, Stacy. Yeah, just a couple, I guess, perhaps competing observations. First is the one building on what Martha just said, and we've been talking about, is the impact in terms of credit rating agencies and how they evaluate us, obviously impacting our potential borrowing costs. It's low now, and everything I sense, this is a pure layman on this, it looks like there's pressure that borrowing costs will only increase with time. But I think another observation, my second observation, my last one is that, a potential tax increase, I think Bert had mentioned, a tapping of the general fund would smooth that tax increase, if you will. And, with the federal income tax limitation on the deduction of state and local taxes, an increase of any size will, proportion over last year, and our local tax works at an especially onerous burden for folks because won't be able to deduct it for federal tax purposes. So that would kind of be an argument in favor of, leaning towards tapping the general fund to minimize the loss of the federal income tax deduction. Those are the 2 points I just want to mention.
And I'll add into Mike, because we still don't know what will come out of Hartford, but the potential incremental tax, state tax on homes that have an assessed a value of, I think it's about 430 with an assessed value of 3 something, we'll have an incremental tax on top of that. So I'm assuming that based upon the market that's here, even though it's based upon the former assessments that we had, a good number of our homes in Darien will meet the threshold. And so adding, this is a good year to sort of smooth that out, just in case that comes to bear in Hartford. So do we want to take a vote on that? I'll just ask.
I don't know. Have you had discussions with the Board of Finance? I just think that that's something that they would always look at. I mean, I guess the sense of the meeting is fine, but
again, I don't want to tell them, but
they wouldn't look at it anyway. But I'm okay.
I just think it further supports them using it. If that's what they're going to do, it says we're in support of that. And I look at it from that regard. I mean, it is partly the rainy day fund. It's been mentioned by the RTM Education, and I don't think we're putting anything on, but we are encouraging them to look at it and maybe be a little more generous this year than they might in the past. How's that for putting it? Although we didn't put generous in the resolution.
Jack, could I suggest, in teeing up the sense of the committee, if we proceed with this, that we just do it as we've done with our other votes in virtual meetings, to go and ask for any nays, any abstentions, and then, go with the rest.
I agree with you, Mike. So let's start with any nays. Any abstentions? Stacy, you're in charge of this, to telling if we have any. Stacy, you still there?
I'm here. I don't see any nays. I didn't see any abstentions.
Okay, then we'll say it's an unanimous passage of a sense of a meeting. Again, it's not fine.
That's 15 that I have present, Jack.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I lost track of trying to count how many people we had, because we had members of education who have the same codes as we do in front of our names. And so it was getting interesting when we were counting. I want to go to the fire apparatus analysis. I know that I would like, and I'll work with Jenny, I would like to send that out to the Board of Finance with a brief write-up. The position that I think I'd like to take is, this is also in support of the Board of Selectmen position, where they eliminated 800 and I believe 28,000 from the accrual this year. We'd like them to continue to not put the accrual this year. I'm not necessarily asking for the Board of Finance to discuss in the short period of time whether or not bonding is appropriate, but at least let's not accrue for it. There is $1.3 million that's sitting out there, and I had a brief conversation with John that if the Board of Finance did decide to bond, that would free up that 1.3 to be either added back into the general fund or to be used to, again, offset certain capital projects that are forthcoming this year. But, again, their choice. And John at least seemed interested with that concept. I know that in having other conversations with Board of Finance member, we weren't looking to give a windfall to the taxpayers because we have that accrual of 1.3. And I concurred with that Board of Finance member on not providing a windfall, and still will allow them to use their judgment, obviously. But this year ended up being a little more special than we thought when we previously had that conversation. So I'd like to at least take a sense of the meeting that we can provide the analysis that was prepared by Jenny and reviewed by Louisa, Bert, and my participation in that to the Board of Finance with a brief write-up. I will tell you, and Jenny can explain this better again than I can.
I'll second that, Jack.
Jenny's not going to vote. And even during the presentation, there's certain things that Jenny cannot say because of her professional position, where she cannot promote bonding to a municipality. But I can, because I'm not in the same category in many ways. So do you want to explain a little bit, Jenny? Because I know you're going to be abstaining.
I will be abstaining. I'm a registered municipal advisor, so the information I provided was basically just it's supposed to be general information for everyone to make a decision on how they would maybe make a recommendation out. I'm not in a position to give advice. So the spreadsheet and the information that you have, or that I think you've all had a chance to review and we're going to forward on, is really just an analysis of what does it look like how's the town doing it now versus what it would look like if they bonded it. And that's where I tap out.
And so that's why I periodically stepped in when Jenny was doing her appropriate middle of the road discussion, and I wanted to emphasize a point that she was unable to do. We have a second on that. Can we do another thing? Because I do believe it's appropriate to hand that off to the Board of Finance. I'm also thinking that perhaps rather than tie them up, that maybe we'll orchestrate a Zoom meeting for anybody who wants to hear to come, and we can go through the analysis again. So that's an option.
I second it, but I also saw Lisa Yarnell's hand up, and I just wanted to comment. I thought it was a really great presentation at our last meeting, so thank you.
Yeah, I'm very impressed. And the mere fact that Mark Chapman, who is the town financial advisor, Kate and Jen were actually brilliant to bring it to him, let him evaluate. And he again, Jenny, what was the exact terms that he found? He thought that, I'll let you say.
It was a sound analysis.
Thank you. You said it much better than I was going to. So are there any nays about submitting this to the Board of Finance? Do we have any?
I do not see any nays.
Okay. Are there any abstentions? Louisa, are you going to abstain?
I don't see why I should abstain. I'm in favor.
Okay, then that's fine. We have one abstention, and we'll just assume that everyone else is in favor of this. The last thing before we get into the outstanding minutes, which I almost forgot last time, was I've done a quick analysis on the public works accruals, which again are straight line. Unlike the fire engines, which are growing at 3.5%, they're only growing at 2%, Jenny. But I think that I just have a problem with accruals. And again, I'm going to be a little blunt. Nobody in corporate finance straight lines anything out 5 to 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, you back end these things to look more like a mortgage with the principal payments coming at the end. They're discounted because you're estimating what some future cost might be, and you could be totally wrong. They increase the tax percentage. So I did a quick and dirty of just discounting what they were going to accrue by 80%, and it seems to work out fairly well, and it saves some money. But also, there's just a point with the public works that I was looking at, that the differential, except for 1 year, a number of years out, and Jen Chinesky suggested we only focus on 10 years, not the 20 or 30 years out. But beyond the 10 years out, there's 1 year that there's about $640,000 of purchases. But the differential between actually accruing for these or just paying for them in the year that they occur isn't a great amount. So I want to take another look at the public works vehicles and provide analysis to this committee on that. And I'll have that at the next meeting. We'll take another sense of the meeting. And if there's no other comments in this longer meeting than I typically would like, we have outstanding minutes. I do want to comment, I actually thought the discussion with the Board of Ed was phenomenal. If we do believe that we need any further discussions or clarifications, we can always invite Jamie and Kate to join us and give us a heads up on anything that's going on there. If you feel that's necessary, email me and I'll arrange it for a future meeting. But I really do appreciate all the topics that were discussed by the Board of Ed. So do I have a motion to approve the outstanding minutes of March 22nd?
I see Lisa, Beth, and Louisa.
Works for me. I'm assuming nobody's going to vote no or abstain, so I'm just going to shorten this up.
Jack, I just want to note that, Louisa, apologies to you, but the two places where your name is misspelled, it'll be corrected in the final.
Okay, so can we have the amended minutes, as Mike just suggested, be approved? We'll take the same two people. All those in favor have a rousing aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's rousing. You guys are all tired. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn, and I want to thank you all for spending so much time here. I've been trying to keep the meeting shorter, but I do believe this was a very good meeting. Thank you all. So do we have a motion to adjourn? I see James motioning that. I see Barry as the second, and we don't allow those guys to sometimes approve or second these things. So that's good. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right.